I apologize that I'm not using a wider camera in here. This is a very old, cheap camera, and in my workshop that's what I like to use. And it's got a screen that faces me, so I can at least see if I'm generally in the area. This is an old blender. I'm standing on the cord for it. It's an old blender that I got for like $2. I think the price is still on it. $5 at a thrift store. And I'm using it to try to make paper mache clay. What I've done is added hopefully just enough water for it to chop this shredded paper even more. I've done it with the glue in it. I don't suggest that I had trouble getting it back out. Let's see what I can get it to do. It's probably one of the very few wood workshops with saws and everything else and a blender. Looks like I may not have added enough water. It's still kind of chunky in there. What I'm trying to do is drip water all over the workshop. What I'm trying to do is get it kind of pasty and pulpy this time before I add any soap to any glue to it. I'll have the clay, basics here. And the thing is, when you make it too wet, it takes forever to dry. And I may just wind up using some Crayola clay, but I've done this recipe before. I did it for the alien head, which you guys let me know if you want to see. And it makes a pretty solid little clay, which is nice, but it did take longer to dry than I wanted, and there was still some papery look to it. Going to try to liquefy. Aside from the fact that it leaves the blender very messy, you can see the other reason I use a cheap workshop blender is because I have a tendency to be rough on them. Like this one popped right off the stand. That may be as good as I'm going to get it. So yeah, I couldn't get the water out of it with it still in the blender. So what we're going to do is go ahead and grab some chunks, squeeze it. Depending on how you feel about certain textures, you may hate this. Oh, good time to get some sound effects though. And throw some of this back in the blender container just because it's convenient right now. Alright, so I finally had to call my wife and ask her to bring me a strainer from upstairs. What I find really interesting is that this glue and stuff, kind of became reactive. There's still water in here after squeezing all these out pretty good. This already has a fair consistency of clay, but you see it breaks apart. So now we're going to mix a couple of pieces of that with a little bit of glue and a little bit of plaster of Paris to give it some real strength. One of the problems I'm going to have is I was being clever, which never turns out too well. And when I was doing the tentacles on the Quadrapus here, right, I was putting the latex on the tentacles. Whatever got smeared on my hands or was left on the brush at the end when I had to dry it out, I went ahead and put on his head here. The whole point of using the paper mache here and then the paper mache clay is that the clay sticks really nicely to the paper. I've never actually tried to get it to stick to latex before, and I'm guessing it's not going to be nearly as strong as a bond, but we'll see. And I could always use a little dab of glue or something to stick it on there better. But so, speaking of dabs, my recipe is very much a dip of this, dab of that, a little bit of the other. No measurements at all. So take it all with a grain of salt, and you might even want to use a grain of salt. So I basically put in like a little, oh look at that, I got it on my hand anyway. So I'm wearing gloves because as some of you know, plaster of Paris will get a little burny as it dries. But this glove has a hole in it. It's not terribly, it's not something I'm terribly scared of. But right now this is just plaster and then some more water, and this started out as 4 of the, fistful lumps that I made before. I'm trying to get that consistency. I didn't add any glue yet because there already was some in here. I'm just trying to get all the powder part of the plaster of Paris mixed in here. And I believe now I'm going to hit it with some of the white glue, knead it a little more, and then we'll get to work on the eyes. As I said before, I always keep a clean workspace. I didn't, and I'm paying for it now. So this little bend here still makes me want to put the eyes on this side. I've got more paper exposed here, though. I think I'm going to put them right around here, even though an octopus, again, would have them more back here. An octopus would also have more of an egg-shaped head. So we're taking a lot of liberties with the quadrupus here. But otherwise it would be an animal, not a monster, right? This is the eyeball I'm doing. What I did, because I'm cheap, I was trying to decide whether to use a whole ball and have it in there on a wire, and you can see how much it would stick out. You know, it was an entire ball, and we'd have to make a big, thick socket for it. Or to go with the half a ball. And I had already painted one even more poorly, right there. But this round look, the ones you can get like at a dollar store or, you know, at a certain Halloween franchise where they're like $8 for the same size bag. You know, you can use that, but the roundness of the pupil just didn't look right for an undersea creature for me. This is more of a snake eye look. And since I was going to break it in half, there was no way I was going to get that the same. I believe this was my attempt at getting one the same shape, so that's how I know it wasn't going to work for me. So the first thing I want to do, though, is get it to where it's going to sit, you know, on these rounded edges here. Actually, if I put it up here, I need to make a way for it to stand better. If I put it here, that's actually not going to be too bad. And I could just build the socket around it. So I think I may just glue it in place and do that, just build the socket around it. That was not my original plan, but as you guys know, my plans often change, and we're there today. So I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun, and we'll be right back. All right, so I've put you further away, which means it's harder to see what I've done. There is his eyeball. When he's faced forwards, it'll be coming out to the side. Oh, I might have put that a little too much forwards. I did, and it's glued on real well now. So there's his little eyeball. I mounted it with the slit that way. That's all up to you. I'm going to grab this mixture. Again, it's the paper. It's been squeezed out, but it's still pretty wet. A little bit of plaster of Paris, about a finger's full, and maybe a half a tablespoon of white glue. And I'm still able to squeeze water out of it. You can see how much water we got in there. Some of it we had to add to get the plaster in. And again, I'm doing this without gloves on because I can barely make the shape this way that I want to make. But with the plaster in there, I suggest you do gloves and eye protection. Okay. So I'm just wringing out as much of the water as I can now. Don't want it to be too much like paper. This is what happened to me last time. It came out where it would crack when it dried because I didn't put enough of the white glue. And I may have done the same thing again. So I'm going to start with the lower brow right here. And just kind of... The tough part is pushing this in, getting that little bit of feathering without pushing the eye back off, which I just said how well glued in it was. And kind of getting the clay to sit flat on there. And then I can see from this brow, so that'll give it something the eye to hold on to. But I can see from that for the top one, if I want it to be larger, I'm going to need a bigger piece. So we'll break off a slightly bigger piece, squeeze it. Don't squeeze it too much like I just did on that first one. Knead it in our hands so we keep that kind of clay texture. Come up around here, bring it down. The other way down this way. Try and get it to touch the other side there. So we've got his eye socket. And I believe that's most of what I want. I'm going to take another little piece. It's much wetter than the last two. We'll just use it to attach. Oops, see. So This piece here I clearly put on too dry. Take some of the water that's still in there and wet it back up. And one of the other things you can do is when you've got these rough patches, if you don't like them, I kind of dig them. You see the texture this clay leaves, it's kind of nice. When we cover that with the latex, we'll see what that looks like, or you could just paint over it, or if you want to get some of this smoothed out more, you can just keep adding some white glue. Which actually, this bottom one that I dried out too much, I might do that on. And it'll give it some more moisture, take some of that roughness out. There'll still be some, but it'll give it more of that clay consistency so you can smooth it and get that to work. And I'm honestly as curious as you guys are going to be as to how well this is going to stick on the latex once it's finished. I need to give that quite a long time to dry because I put it on nice and wet. One of the other things you could do with the glue is the same thing we do with the latex. Take a little bit of the paint color that you're using as your base color, mix it with the glue, put it all on in one coat. Again, white glue generally dries clear, so it'll just leave the color of the glue, of the paint rather. I'm going to go ahead and stop this here because the last video was over 20 minutes long and is not doing so hot. I'm wondering how much of that is because of how long it is and how much of it is just because, you know, the video quality suffered so I could get the job done as it did today. We'll be back when we get the rest of the paint on here and, you know, you guys can see what it looks like.